Congratulations! You made the Varsity, the podcast. My name is John Arand, and I'm Buck's sports correspondent and host of this pod. And today, I'm happy to have Mike Florio return to the pod for a lot of sports business talk. Florio joins us from his Pro Football Talk set in Canton, Ohio, hours before the Hall of Fame game. Perfect timing for an NFL preview show. We're going to touch on a bunch of topics, from media rights to 18th games to Tony Romo. I love having Florio on the pod. This is going to be a good one. But before I get to Mike Florio, today is Sunday, August 9th, and here's what I'm watching. I want to talk about the Preakness Stakes, the second leg of the Triple Crown. Now, a bunch of you may have missed the news last week that the Preakness signed a new media deal that keeps a horse race on NBC for another 6 years. Now, normally, I wouldn't devote this segment to such a small deal. I'm told NBC is paying close to $5 million per year for the rights, which is just about double what it had been paying. That's a great deal for Doug Perlman, who negotiated on behalf of the race. But I've been spending the past several years describing a tough marketplace for sports media rights, one where the biggest properties will be fine. That's the NFL, the SEC, the Big Ten, the NBA. And the smaller to mid-sized properties, like the Preakness, would be left with the scraps. Now look, I love the Preakness. It's a people's race, but nobody would ever describe it as a Tier 1 property. So how did the Preakness manage to double its rights fees in this market? Well, in this case, there were a couple of factors that caused this jump. One, there was competition for those rights. NBC holds the rights to the Kentucky Derby. Fox has them for the Belmont. They both wanted to control this second leg of the Triple Crown. Plus, streamers were lurking. Netflix likes to eventize stuff, right? So why wouldn't it want to buy the rights to one of the 3 Triple Crown races and market around that? It's like buying a house. When you have multiple bidders, they bid each other up, and that's what happened here. But it's about more than that. The Preakness didn't convince media companies that it was all of a sudden a Tier 1 media property, but it did position itself as a strategic property. For NBC and Fox, it was strategic to enhance the investment they both already made in the Triple Crown. And for the streamers, it was a strategic way to try and get into a new sports, to eventize. And now that's my long-winded way of saying that these results, doubling of the rights fees, don't signal a changing market, but it does offer a blueprint for how anyone not named the NFL can still work out good deals. As for now, let's get to Mike Florio. Mike Florio, live from Canton, Ohio. Thank you very much for joining the pod. The beginning of the NFL season, the thing about the Hall of Fame game as a kid, I just remember turning on the TV and I'm like, oh my goodness, they're playing football again. The actual football players. Back then it was the starters would play for a quarter or two, but it always marks the official beginning of or the unofficial beginning, I suppose. But there are so many storylines and there's so many things I want to talk to you about, and you can read on the side of the panel there. But I just want to give you like an open-ended question. In terms of off-field topics, what do you prioritize? What are sort of the biggest things that you're following in the league right now off the field?
Well, when it comes to off-the-field issues, it seems like there's always a new one that pops up every week that becomes the focal point, and then everything else gets nudged to the back burner until the next development that pulls it to the front burner. I'll give you a prime example. The looming decision from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in the Sunday ticket class action, depending upon how that goes, that could be seismic. So we know that at some point the ruling is going to come. I'm not paying attention to it other than to wait for the white smoke to come from the chimney at the Ninth Circuit's courthouse. But that's going to entail a lot of reading, understanding, digesting, analyzing, and understanding the ramifications depending upon which way it goes. So I think a lot of these off-field issues are just kind of there until they're not. And meanwhile, there's another new one that drops out of the sky every so often.
And then when they hit, I mean, you're so right. We've talked about this before when you've been on. This Sunday ticket suit, as it goes through, if it continues to go through as we're looking at it, can take all of the media rights deals, and frankly, the sponsorship deals and everything else on top of it, and just throw it into utter chaos to where potentially in a worst. I'm not. Is it a worst case scenario? In the worst case scenario, the Cowboys can negotiate with Netflix or CBS or Fox or whoever for all of their home games, just like potentially the NFC Central could say, okay, we're going to pool our rights and sort of go as the NFC Central, and that's a worst case scenario. There's almost certainly going to be something that plays out before that so that doesn't happen, but. It's the way the NFL has done business since the 1960s could be tossed aside on this one.
And even if we never get to the point where it's the full chaos of the Cowboys selling their rights for an ungodly amount and the Jaguars scrambling to find a public access channel, and I'm kidding, I don't want to get Jaguars fans any more upset with me than they'd already be inclined to be, but there would be a huge gap between the most popular and the least popular teams nationally. Even without that, the ruling in the Sunday ticket case could just throw the entire Sunday ticket model into chaos. There could be eventually a court order preventing the NFL from operating Sunday ticket the way it does. There could be a situation where, and this is one of the models that came out during the trial, the idea, and the NFL has looked into this, of having every game on the collection of cable channels that we all already pay for on a monthly basis. So you can flip around from ESPN to ESPN2 to FS1 to NBCSN, and there's going to be a 1 o'clock Eastern game on there in lieu of having to plunk down $400 plus to have the ability to watch any of them. They'll all be available through the channels you already pay for. That's one potential outcome to all of this. So, and the NFL possibly having to come up with $14 billion, which is not exactly an easy amount of money for a multi-billion-dollar corporation to come up with in cash. There's a lot at stake, and that's just a prime example of something that is there. We know it's there. Nothing's happening, but eventually something's going to happen, and it could be something big.
By the way, as usual, you made just such a good point there. I live in D.C., as I've met with a bunch of Capitol Hill staffers, and they don't care about the NFL selling packages to Fox or really even to Netflix. What they care about is that Sunday ticket. Like if they're from, let's say, Georgia, they want to be able to see every single Falcons game without having to pay $200, $300, or whatever the cost is for a Sunday ticket this year. They want an affordable package to where they can see their own team's games, which in the year of 2026 should be made available in some form or another. But that does take the whole Sunday ticket business model and throw it on its head pretty much.
And John, that's one area where the committee that had the hearing back in June essentially hoisted the NFL on its own petard by pointing out, yes, you'll say that the Sunday ticket package is there for the zealous fan that wants to watch every game, but the way they used to market it and their own internal data shows this is a product for the people who care about one team. They don't live in the market where that team plays. The only way they can see all of the Sunday afternoon games of that team is to have Sunday ticket. I know when I was a consumer only, that's why I got Sunday ticket. I didn't live in Vikings country. I wanted to watch Vikings game. The only way, I didn't care about the other games. I mean, yeah, I had access to them, so I'd watch some of them. But the whole purpose of buying it is you can see every game of that one team wherever you may live. And they make it ridiculously expensive, as I'm sure you've discussed at length, and I know we've discussed this in the past. They make it ridiculously expensive as a disincentive so that people will just say, I can't afford that. I'll just watch the free games that are on the local Fox and CBS affiliates, even if it's not the team that I would prefer to watch play.
I'm sure this isn't new news, but it's new news to me, Mike. The king of West Virginia was a Vikings fan, not the Steelers, not the Ravens, not the you have so many more closer teams to you. I'm a little bit shocked by that.
John, I grew up in the shadows of Pittsburgh, and I came of age in the early 70s. I first discovered the NFL in the Immaculate Reception game between the Steelers and the Raiders. All signs should have pointed to me being a Steelers fan, but as you may have noticed over the years, I do have a little bit of a contrarian streak. So when everyone told me, oh, you need to be a Steelers fan, I said, hey, there's a bunch of other teams. I'll pick my own damn team. Thank you very much. And that's what I did.
That's great. Your answer is I can't argue with it. That is the number one business item that's coming is the Sunday ticket case going through the courts. I am totally fascinated by this Tony Romo situation. Tony Romo, of course, was arrested near Milwaukee, charged with operating while intoxicated. There's been how long is that video? 25 minutes? A long video of him trying to figure out how to walk a straight line and not understanding directions. And he apparently had an open container. And he's since been put on leave, indefinite leave, by CBS Sports. He makes $18 million a year. CBS is being taken over by Paramount and looking to cut costs. They have somebody in the wings in J.J. Watt, who is prepared to come in. They also have Greg Olson over at Fox. His contract is up after this year, a potential number one analyst. Troy Aikman at ESPN, his contract is up after this year, a potential a number one analyst. Kirk Herbstreit, the Thursday Night Football analyst over at Amazon, his contract is up after this season as well. So and then you have Tony Romo, who is still a popular sort of like an everyman type figure that resonates sort of in the heartland. How CBS is able to navigate this and what comes of this is something that I'm going to be very interested in this season.
Well, and John, all we can do is read the tea leaves as those tea leaves are disseminated by CBS, Paramount, and Skydance. And for the first week of this Tony Romo saga, CBS said nothing, which sent a message. And then last Friday came an unmistakable message in the form of a very terse one-line press release. Tony Romo has been placed on leave of absence until further notice. And then they announced that J.J. Watt's taken his place. I think that said everything about his short-term prospects, and it may say plenty about his long-term prospects. And it doesn't look good at this point for Tony Romo to return to CBS. The question becomes, how do they resolve this? Does he get the full $72 million to walk away? Do they try to use the morals clause in his contract and pigeonhole this entire escapade in Milwaukee into what is a very broad, very vague, very malleable clause in a contract that if a network wants to be aggressive, they could say, you violated the morals clause based upon the arrest, based upon the video, based upon the open container, and then they fight it out and they settle it for some number of cents on the dollar. Half, 60%, who knows? So that's all to be determined. But I think once you put the guy on leave and you immediately name his replacement, because most of the people who tune in for the games week one, they're not going to know about any of this. They're just going to tune in the game and they're going to see Jim Nantz and they're going to see J.J. Watt and they're going to be like, what the hell's going on? And it'll be interesting to see how CBS explains it from the get-go. There's a chance maybe it's all resolved by then. And it's just Jim Nantz and J.J. Watt as your number one announced team on CBS for the entire season. But it just doesn't feel to me, and I know you have this same sense, based on what we've seen so far, it sure doesn't seem like Tony Romo's coming back. That's all subject to change, but as of right now, it feels like he's done.
Yeah, that would be my bet. And I haven't talked to CBS about this, but I've talked to people in the business, and you work in the business, and you know that there's not a big appetite for the idea of Tony Romo memes coming out after every game. Tony Romo, part of what he does, he says bizarre things on screen. You know, that's part of his charm. You know, like and the way he interacts with Nantz. All of a sudden, the social would be filled with, is he drunk, or you know, has he been drinking before he came into the into this? That video, if you watch the entire 30-minute video, or I forget how long it is, and like there are several clippable moments, and CBS they're about to enter into a Super Bowl year. They're about to ingest Warner Brothers Discovery. This is, you know, they're worried about the reputation of CBS Sports, and they're also worried about the reputation of Tony Romo and whether or not whether or not he can overcome this. Because one thing that I do disagree with you a little bit, a lot of people are going to tune in and be surprised to see JJ Watt. I mean, this was making TMZ. This was this made, whatever front pages are these days. What do people say now when they say made front pages out of the in the media? But it was a big media story. So I think that there is a lot of people
if you
that
get an alert on your phone
in that know this.
You're probably right. Most football fans detach from the drip of the NFL between the Super Bowl and week one, but sometimes the stuff that goes on is sufficiently significant that it does invade that thing we carry around everywhere we go that is our connection to the world. And when you start getting alerts about Tony Romo and you click here, you click there, you know the story pretty quickly. So I'll agree with you on that, but I just still think that if I was making the decisions on this, I'd want to have it all buttoned up before week one. I don't want to have some long, awkward explanation. I don't want to have this situation where halfway through the season, JJ Watt's knocked back down to number 2 and Tony Romo comes back at number 1. They typically like to have their lineup set from week 1 through the postseason.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And I have to believe that David Burson and David Ellison, I have to believe that they pretty much know how this is going to end. And they're just got, why not just come and rip the Band-Aid off? This is a pod that is posting on Sunday, and CBS has their annual NFL preview press conference in New York on Tuesday. So you can bet that this is going to be a very big question for David Burson and for the other CBS executives. Really only the first and only question, because Tony Romo has always been sort of the big star that goes there. I was there. I remember there last year, he was at a table with Nance, and I was one of 8 reporters just sitting at the table, just listening to Tony tell stories. So he's always been a big part of this. So it's, I think we're probably going to see a lot more coming out of CBS, or at least something coming out of CBS this week.
And then if he doesn't come back, John, you wonder where Tony Romo goes next. Does he get involved in coaching? Does he launch a podcast of his own? Does another network hire him at some point? It's not impossible to come back from something like this. I just feel like that what happened came at a bad time because there was already that external scrutiny on Romo, and there had been reporting about internal efforts to try to get him to perform better than he had been, but he's handed them a potential silver bullet, and we'll see if they're going to take advantage of it. And I think last week's press release was an indication, fairly clear one, that they are.
Yeah, and then one more topic on this is CBS and Fox. They care deeply about their number 2 team. That number 2 team often has a national game. And really matters. Greg Olson is the analyst on the number 2 game over at Fox. What does CBS do now? Because I mentioned earlier, Herb Street, Aikman, and Greg Olson are up. Could they slot JJ Watt back to the number 2 and just say, you were so good with Iron Eagle, like that's what we want you to do? Do they just promote Trent Green and sort of keep it from within? Because I think Trent is probably on the 3rd group. They don't really rank them like that outside of the top 2. But there are a couple of other knock-on effects if Tony Romo does indeed leave, as we both suspect he will.
Well, I think you're right. And a lot of it depends upon how J.J. Watt performs this year, how he's received this year. He could work his way into that job and never let go of it for as long as he wants to stay in broadcasting, or they could decide we're going to tap him on the shoulder and put him back to number 2, which wouldn't be as awkward as what Fox did to Greg Olson when they sent him to the number 2 team and brought in Tom Brady. I mean, the reality is, number 1, number 2, there aren't many of those seats. And if you want that job, if you want to call these games, travel around to the stadiums, you got to take what they'll ultimately give you. And CBS is going to have to make the business decision after the season. If Tony Romo isn't coming back, what do we do? Do we keep Watt in this spot, or do we go pursuing one of these other big names? And another name you haven't mentioned who's going to be floating around, I believe, is Travis Kelce. He's going to, and whether it's Thursday night, whether it's a Sunday afternoon premiere spot, that's another one that gets thrown into the mix for CBS to make a decision. And then you may have to make the decision, John, how much do I want to pay Troy Aikman, or Travis Kelce, or somebody who's at that very, very top? And can I get J.J. Watt in the number one spot for maybe a lot less than these other guys would command?
Well, exactly. And I think Troy is on like about 18 million. I think he got like $1 more than Romo's contract. It was a competitive thing for him, but ESPN had to pay that. If you remember, ESPN had a booth that was not up to snuff in terms of calling NFL games. The NFL demanded that they improved it. So what did they do? They went and they raided Fox's first booth. They got Joe Buck and they got Troy Aikman. I'm not sure if CBS feels the same sort of level of angst that ESPN did then, because CBS, I think if they look at their lineup, it's a deep lineup. And so if you can lose Romo, you can bring in J.J. Watt to number one. You lose J.J. Watt on the two, you can bring Trent Green into that one. So I don't think that they feel that they need to make a big splash in terms of that.
And they're going to get big games no matter what. I know there was a period of time when ESPN and the NFL weren't necessarily getting along, where the Monday night schedule wasn't as good as it could have been. But those Sunday afternoon games, the 4:25 p.m. Eastern kickoff, when it's the doubleheader on Fox or CBS rotating back and forth, that's a huge, huge game. Significant ratings, bigger audiences than any of the primetime games for the most part. So I think the NFL will want CBS to take care of it, and it will be taken care of. And there are surely some within CBS that will believe that J.J. Watt is instantly an improvement over Romo because of just the way. And I don't see a big difference between Tony Romo of 2017 and Tony Romo of 2025. It may just be that people's tastes changed. He's kind of quirky. He's authentic. He, at times, says things that make people say, what the hell was he saying? But, you get used to that as a consumer, and that becomes part of his charm. So there will be people there, though, that are happy to move on, and they'll move on to somebody who will placate the NFL, and they'll continue to get great games, and they'll continue to be 25 to 30 million people whenever they have a late afternoon window tuning in to watch it.
Mike, I'm going to give you some news here. Right before we started this pod, Fox was giving their quarterly earnings report, and Lachlan Murdoch went up and said, you know what, we're waiting until 2029, and then we're going to reopen our deal and talk to the NFL then, which I have to tell you, I'm just kind of processing this as I'm talking, but it came as a surprise to me because everything that I heard was that the leading up to that is that the NFL has sort of stepped back from going after billions and billions and billions of more. They wanted increases, of course, but not as much as some of the early numbers that were floated. And the networks were keen on trying to get the NFL for an extra 3, 4, 5 years. If that comes to pass, if what Lachlan says is true, it means that the renewals for the NFL, they're not going to really open them up for anybody until 2029. And one of the big storylines of this season that I was going to keep an eye on could be going up in smoke.
Well, and when you think of how this all came to be, they do the current deals that technically run through 2033, but the NFL can opt out and shorten them through 2029. ESPN's got 1 year longer on each end because it fits with the Super Bowl rotation. But once the NBA got their deal, and really the UFC deal, Dana White was crowing about how much the UFC got from Paramount for its product. The NFL justifiably frustrated that they left meat on the bone. So the plan was, we're going to opt out, so we'll offer to the networks the opportunity to buy back those 4 years, but they got to pay us more, not later, they got to pay us more now. And they were ramping that up. The thinking was CBS is going to go first, then they'll presumably migrate to Fox. And hey, Rupert Murdoch activated the political bat signal, and I think that caused the NFL to ultimately back down. And the networks have decided, apparently, that they're not going to pay more money now. They'll take their chances and let this go through 2029. And John, I think the political stuff, it wasn't about changing the current status quo as it relates between the balance of network and streaming. I think they want to lock it where it is so that Netflix, Amazon, Apple, YouTube aren't candidates to come in and take the Fox package or the CBS package or even the NBC package. I think that's what that political stuff that Murdoch instigated is all about. Keeping the networks viable and ensuring that they have packages beyond 2029. Once you feel comfortable that's going to happen, it's a lot easier to dig in your heels and say, we're not giving you any more money now. Let's talk in 2029.
In fact, one of the points that the NFL continuously tried to make is like, we're not taking games from broadcast and putting them on streaming. We're taking them from cable and putting them on streaming. I just saw a report from Nielsen saying that ESPN, which a decade ago was in 100 million homes, 100 million homes subscribed to satellite and cable and got ESPN, that number is now at under 55 million in about 13 years. Cable is going one way, and by the way, that does include the YouTube TVs and the Hulu Plus Live TVs. It's a multi-channel bundle. The NFL and everybody else sees where cable is headed, and they want to take those games that were on cable and put them on streaming now. So the idea that really Fox is trying to get on Capitol Hill is that broadcast matters. Broadcast is quote unquote free. I mean, it's not, but that's that works with the senators and everything, and it's a voter friendly position to take, to say, I'm going to try to save you money to watch the most popular entertainment programming in the country, maybe the world.
And you're right. The way that we consume content has changed. Whether the NFL is trying to blaze the trail or walk the path that already exists, they want to go to where the customers are. Maybe to a certain extent, they want to take the customers with them. But the reality is you've got the broadcast antitrust exemption as it was crafted in 1961. It applies to network, over-the-air, FCC regulated TV. And I just think all of this political stuff is an example of the reality that times have changed so dramatically. It just makes sense for Congress at some point to go back and just look at that language and say, how does that language need to be changed? I'm not saying it needs to go away. I'm saying, how does it need to be changed to reflect the way the world now is? Because back in those days, that's all we had was over-the-air FCC regulated airwaves. Now there are all these other options, and the antitrust exemption, if it's going to continue, and I think it will, it needs to reflect the way things currently are. And maybe that's where this leads, if Congress ever is in a position where it's capable of functioning like it once did.
And I am also keeping my eyes on CBS, because CBS, the NFL can use a change of control provision in their contract with CBS, because Paramount came in or Skydance came in and bought CBS. I would have thought that would have been a deal that would be done by now. There's, believe me, there's no press release sort of waiting to be pressed. I don't think that deal is close. And if they're unable, I'm just curious to see what the NFL does with CBS, because they can get more money out of CBS, but do they really want to have CBS paying discernibly more than its competitors for the same programming? It's that's another aspect of this that I find to be interesting. It's easy for Fox and NBC, and also nobody talks about Amazon on this. Amazon has been like, look, we signed a contract, we're taking you to the end of the contract. What happens with Paramount and CBS, I think, is going to be particularly interesting on this one.
Well, and think about it this way, John. Okay, the NFL's got the change of control provision, which would allow them, in theory, to pull the plug on the CBS deal and take it back to market. Who's going to buy the CBS package right now? If the CBS package were available today, is Fox going to double up and just have all? That doesn't make any sense, to have all those games, because you only have so many affiliates and they can only show so many games at once. Fox isn't going to want it. Is NBC going to want to have an afternoon package and a Sunday night package? Is ABC going to swoop in and take that package? And I think this gets back to the whole concept of delaying this ongoing push for streaming and deferring the idea that the CBS package would go or the Fox package would go to Netflix or Apple or Amazon or some other streaming product. That's my gut feeling as to what it's all about. So you've got your finite number of packages. All four of the major networks have one. And the thinking is they'll continue to have one. And one of them isn't going to be without a chair when the music stops. Remember years ago, they used to have a model where there would always be that one extra company lurking just to ensure that they would get maximum dollars for the current partners. And there was always someone left behind. We've had all four networks at the table now for years, 20 years. And I don't see that changing. Even if the NFL would say we're putting your contract out to bid, it may be the only network that shows up is CBS.
Mike, I talked about that in the intro when I talked about the Preakness stakes. Nobody views the Preakness stakes as a tier 1 sports property. They just signed a deal with NBC that doubles their rights fee. The Preakness stakes, but they did that because Fox wanted it, NBC wanted it, and a couple of streamers wanted it as well. In the NFL, they always had, especially when David Levy was there, they always had Turner Sports lurking, saying like, we can take the cable package from ESPN, or we can. They were open for business. Well, pretty soon, I think anyway, the Turner Sports is going to be part of CBS. They lost a really significant bidder, and the noise coming out of Capitol Hill saying like, we want you to slow down what you're doing with the streamers, because all of the leagues, not just the NFL, all the leagues looked at the streamers like, okay, that's where we're going to find our next bidders from. Well, if Congress is telling the NFL, which it is, slow that down, you're right. They have just enough packages for just enough bidders, which even for somebody something as powerful as the NFL could make it for a tough negotiating phase.
And John, I had a conversation with someone back when the political stuff first started to boil, and the NFL at the time was believed to be trying to get CBS to go from $2.1 billion per year to $3 billion per year, and then would move to Fox and presumably move to NBC and then to Amazon and then eventually ESPN and ABC. Once the pushback started, the challenge for the NFL was finding an off-ramp. How do we get ourselves out of this process that we've started? And it very well could be at the end of the day, and it reminds me of when George Costanza quit his job and just showed up for work the next day, just act like it didn't happen. It could be the NFL just acts like it didn't try to do this and waits till 2029 along with the networks.
I want to go on another topic that I'm looking at. Is this is going to be the first season that the NFL will own a 10% stake in ESPN as it moves forward. ESPN is bringing in NFL Network. You and I have really no idea how this is going to transpire or what's going to happen. I can tell you that if you speak to anybody that's done journalism at ESPN, they always say like never once have they been slowed down on a story, or never once has an editor said, oh, we don't want to do that because the NFL is our biggest partner. But I'm eager to get you on here because like you run Pro Football Talk. You're employed by NBC Sports. The NFL is so important to NBC Sports. I'm certain that they've never told you not to write something. I'm certain of that. But do you have something in your mind as you're coming out with something? Is there something about like, I probably shouldn't press, or is there like an internal editor almost that actually for you, I know there's not. The NFL, you're effing Florio, for goodness sakes. But is there is that something that to take a look at? Is that something to be a concern?
The cinematic devil on the left shoulder and angel on the right shoulder. Every once in a while they do battle, but it's never because of what I think the NFL is going to say. It's just I want to be accurate, I want to be fair, I want to be right, and I want to serve my audience the right way. And I go all the way back to 2009 with NBC. Rick Cordella, who's now the president of NBC Sports, he was working for Dick Ebersol at the time. They promised me from the get-go, and Dick signed off on this. I've got full and complete editorial control over everything I write at PFT. Now, the bigger the platform and the more the platform is tied to NBC, specifically on Football Night in America, I'm going to defer and work with the producers, and I'm not going to go rogue and say whatever I would feel like saying. I'll confine that to profootballtalk.com. So I never think about that. I do my job. Have there been times where maybe there's a little back channel consternation that makes its way to me? Yes, but NBC's had my back every step of the way. And that's 17 years and counting. So that's a true commitment to covering the sport objectively and fairly, even if it may from time to time frustrate and aggravate the entity that is at the heart of it. And it becomes harder to do that when that entity is owning media companies. It had been that way for 20 years when it owned NFL Network. And now that it owns 10% of ESPN, there may be instances. And John, you mentioned that the ESPN people say, well, we're never going to undermine our journalism because of this partnership with the NFL. Here's the thing to watch. When they have a deep dive investigative story that may make the NFL and or one of its teams look bad, what do they do with it? When do they release it? How do they showcase it on the various ESPN car wash of shows? There was a time when they would strategically pick, in my view, maximum disruption for dropping one of these stories. And the person that wrote it would be on every ESPN show you can imagine talking about it. So they may still check the box on journalism. Let's see how much of a spotlight they shine. Let's see how strategic they are about putting it at a good spot instead of maybe burying it on a Friday afternoon. That's the thing to watch as it relates to ESPN's journalism of the NFL.
You know, Mike, you opened that story by talking about the devil on one shoulder, the angel on the other shoulder. I'm just dying to know, does the angel ever win? I mean, the angel must give up a lot, right?
The Angel does slightly better than the Washington Generals against the Harlem Globetrotters. Let's leave it at that. Slightly better.
So I think my question to you though, it's like and listen, I know that the NFL complains about Mike Florio because they complained to me about Mike Florio, but I'm certain that those complaints make their way up. But do you think that you've paved new ground to where the NFL it sort of understands how to work with media companies now, or is it down to the person? Well, I'm talking about the NFL as a monolith. It's really down to individual personalities and people. But the NFL owning a stake, is that different than than NBC being having its entire business wrapped around the NFL?
Well, I think when you own a stake, it's a lot easier to pick up the phone and make the call and have someone answer it and listen to what your complaint is and give you whatever it is you're looking for. Whatever it is that triggered the call from the league office to ESPN, there's a greater likelihood that they're going to deal with it instead of politely finding a way to just talk it through and end it. So I know from my perspective, I've been doing this 25 years as of November 1. That's when PFT launched back on November 1 of 2001. I'm convinced that the league office still has not figured out how to properly interact with me on a consistent basis and engage with me on a consistent basis. So we'll see if over the next 25 years they figure it out.
Before we leave this topic, is there any other, getting outside of editorial and journalism, is there any other aspect to this NFL Network, ESPN, and then NFL owning a stake in ESPN? Any other aspect of that deal that people should keep their eyes on?
Well, I think that to the extent there's overlap between what you see on NFL Network and what you see on ESPN, very quietly, they did not have an NFL Network schedule release show this year. That wasn't announced ahead of time. They just simulcast the ESPN version. Will they continue to have an NFL Network standalone, separately produced pregame show on Sundays? Will they continue to have an NFL Network robust all weekend long draft show? Or will at some point it just be the ESPN NFL products ending up on NFL Network as a simulcast? That's what's going to be interesting. And look, doing both cuts against all concepts of good business and economies of scale. Why do we have two operations? Why do we have two sets of talent? Why do we have any of this when we can just pump the same damn show onto two multiple channels? But I think that's the thing to watch. How much overlap in ESPN content and NFL Network content happens going forward. And as that happens, you'll see fewer and fewer NFL Network only shows and fewer NFL Network only employees.
Yeah, and what makes the NFL Network so valuable is the handful of games, live games that they have on it. So that makes it undroppable to the cable operators, satellite operators, and et cetera, et cetera. I have a couple more minutes left. I did want to hit on something that we talk about a lot, the March to an 18th game, which has always seemed inevitable, still seems inevitable, but it just it isn't happening. Is it still inevitable?
It's inevitable. And John, it'll happen by 2031, or at a minimum, it'll be scheduled to begin in the 2032 season as a result of the end of a 2031 lockout, because that's what they'll eventually do. They'll lock the players out until the players cry uncle on the key terms. And one of the key terms is going to be 18 regular season games. The other key term is going to be 16 international games every year. So the union, if it wants, can get ahead of that and maybe get a better deal by agreeing to those two terms now. To his credit, J.C. Tretter, the new NFLPA executive director, realized he's too new in the job to build the right consensus and to sell to the rank and file the idea of playing an extra regular season game. The NFL wanted to do it now. The NFL wanted to add an 18th game by 2027. Only very recently did they finally put the date in stone for Super Bowl 62 to be played in Atlanta in February of 2028. They had kept that date open because they were holding out hope that they'd have a deal for 18 games by 2027. So now that can gets kicked to 2028, and then there's 29 and 30, and at some point we get to the end of the CBA. But the reason it didn't happen, all the turmoil at the union, and J.C. Tretter doing a very good job of fending off the league at a time when the league would like to get something done. One source told me back in March, the league feels its business has been constipated by the turmoil at the union in recent years. Can the league get the union to do something next year so that they can go to 18 games by 2028? That's the next question.
It's certainly a big bargaining chip by the union. Mike Florio, I love it every time you come on the pod. Thank you so much for taking the time this time. And I'll see you at some stadium at some point, I'm sure.
Great talking to you, John, as always.
So thanks to Mike Florio for joining this week. Love having him on the pod. But more importantly, thank you for listening to The Varsity, an Odyssey podcast in partnership with Puck. I also want to acknowledge the executive editors from Puck. That's Gabi Grossman, Ben Landy, John Kelly, the great Bob Tabador from Odyssey, and our partners at Nesson, Greg Poth and Matt Kolpitz. If you like this podcast, make sure to sign up for my newsletter. It's also called The Varsity. Head over to puck.news and use the code word The Varsity, all one word, for a 20% discount. I'll see you on Wednesday.